Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol na'eh b'pareh. Hainu lebracha. Good tavach, Shavua Tov. A new week, new divine energy. L'chaim, l'chaim bracha. We're going to review the the discourse that we learned. So that way we come away with the teachings. We remember something. We take it with us and live with it. So based on yesterday's Haftorah reading, Vayishlach Yeshua sent to men to spy out the land. And as the Alter Rebbe explains, the difference between the spies of Joshua, Yeshua, and Moses, Moshe, is in two things. Joshua was commanded to send spies, and he sent specifically to Jericho, Yericho, and from there to the rest of the land, but the spies were specific to Jericho. So commanded, and specifically to Jericho. From there to the rest of the land of Israel was, to open up the land specifically. Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, on the other hand, was not commanded to send spies, but yet he sent spies to the entire land of Israel. So we learn this in spiritual terms, and as noted, everything in the physical world and every story that unfolds on the ground, if you will, evolves from the spiritual realm, right? In a way, everything that we do in a physical action down here is because emotionally, psychologically, and even beyond that, spiritually, that's where it comes from. And that we get. So what does this mean? So the main point of this is Yericho, Jericho comes from the reach, smell, which smell is a metaphor for clothing, as clothes have a fragrance to them, a smell to them. Clothing is the idea of thought, speech, and action in the individual. And hence we're commanded to, we're obliged to master our thought, speech, and action. Hence the command to Joshua to send the spies, as opposed to Moses, to Moshe Rabbeinu. He is coming to bring spies for the entire land of Israel. The entire land of Canaan is made up of 7 nations. Which, 7 nations of the land of Israel represent 7 emotions. Chesed, words, netzach, yisod, malchus. Kindness, strength, compassion, endurance / triumph, acknowledgement / humility, connectivity, and royalty. 7 emotions. The emotions is not something we're commanded to conquer, to spy out, if you will, because we're not able to. We're not able to to transform our emotions. Only the righteous can. But us, Bainani in training, BITs, our capacity is limited, right? If we have a feeling in the heart, we're commanded not to allow that negative feeling to play itself out in our minds, right? That's thought, speech, and action. But the fact that we have that feeling, right, it's officially summer, but I still have my official spring allergies. They sprung into summer. So we we can't master that. So we're not commanded. Yet we see that there is a commandment to conquer the land. So how do we understand that? Right, what is the eternal message of the conquering of the land? The conquering the land of the seven nations, right? So we explain that before our soul comes into this world, it's actually the very first words of chapter 1 of Tanya, is that we're administered an oath that we should be righteous. How could we be administered an oath to be righteous if, in fact, we cannot master our emotions? Which means mastering your emotions means not to have a negative thought ever come up in your heart. That's what it means. So what it means is that even though we will not master it in fact, but we should make an effort to be like the righteous. So just as the righteous love only something that is divine and abhor anything that's the antithesis of the divine. So that means we should practice to be like the righteous and think about, meditate upon loving only the divine of that of life and abhorring that which is not divine. So, you know, to eat just for the sake of pleasure is human, but not divine. So you don't love that. And not only that, you think about it and you think about how that's the antithesis of a divine connection. And therefore, you don't want it. You even think about how that is um, a very negative thing, which is pretty powerful. Now, what's the reason that thought, speech, and action versus our emotions, right? This is what our discussion is, right? Thought, speech, and action. We have an obligation to, responsibility to master. When it comes to our emotions, we don't have that. Um, So the reason for this is, so, sorry, is because the metaphor is that they're garments, right? They're garments. And garments is something um, that we could put on and off. Garments also are something that are needed, that we should be modest and not embarrassed, right? So the words that we say, that they shouldn't embarrass. And also, garments are there to protect in extreme weathers, right? And garments are something, again, that you can put on and off, right? Cold weather, you need one kind of garment. Hot weather, you need a different kind of garment. So likewise, when it comes to the soul, thought, speech, and action are something that we can choose to put on and off. This is the right thought now. So this is what I clothe myself with. I clothe my soul with this thought. Another time, well, that's not the right thought. So I have a different thought, right? I have the mastery. I have the choice. Even when it comes to thought, which is constant, I could still choose one thought over another. But when it comes to our intelligence, right, the way I perceive the world, perceive life, and my emotions, they are the soul. That's hard to change. That takes a great effort. If someone is full of anger, for them to not be an angry person, to change that is difficult. Such a person to not think the angry thing or to say the angry thing, that's something that they have the capacity, right? They have the capacity. Now, says the Rebbe, that I could say that really, it's not just because we have the capacity, but to change our clothing, to change our thoughts, to choose our thoughts. But actually, it's more important, that notion that I could choose the thought that I want over the feeling that I have. So I can have a feeling of being upset. I was triggered by something emotionally and I'm upset. I could choose to think a different thought. Then what would naturally come up to my thoughts is a negative feeling towards that person, right? Like, this is more important. And we'll understand that by understanding about clothing themselves. How is it possible that my clothing, it's a piece of material. It's an inanimate object. I mean, okay, whatever. This is wool. So it came on the back of some sheep. Um, but how is it possible that it's protecting me? How is it possible, even more than protecting me, that it actually is honoring me, glorifying me? The clothes make the man. How's that possible? Now, um, again, there's a whole industry out there, especially for women, on how the clothes beautify the individual. So like no one ever thinks about it, but because that's a reality that's so embedded in the human condition. But why is it that way? Is because the root source of the clothing is greater than the person. And therefore they can protect the person, therefore they can beautify the individual. So metaphorically, the root source of my thoughts, my speech and action, even though they're only garments of the soul, they're not the soul itself. Its root source is greater and a higher place than my intelligence and emotional makeup of the soul. And that's why they can, in fact, glorify and bring honor to the individual, because they are greater. Not greater the way it is down here. In its root source, it is greater. Greater than in the individual. Right? Therefore, thought, speech, and action that a person does in a mitzvah, they are the garments of the divine soul. They bring an ascent, an aliyah, an exaltedness to the soul. They do that. Bring an exaltedness to the soul. Greater than what the soul would be on its own stead, on its own reality. So through the mitzvah that the garment of the soul does, like right now, thinking words of Torah, speaking words of Torah, as we're doing right now, or soon going to give some charity and saying words of prayer and so on, that are the garments of the soul, we're able to have a divine pleasure of the Shekhinah, of the divine presence of God. That gives us the capacity. That's, of course, when your thought, speech, and action are towards God in the mitzvah, as opposed to that my thought, speech, and action are motivated by um, the self, the animal soul, and survival of the animal soul. Survival physically, emotionally, psychologically, and even spiritually. It actually brings the person down. It brings you down to lesser than what you are. Therefore, the main engagement of the person is to stay away from evil and do good in actuality of thought, speech, and action. And this is the purpose of the soul that came down here, in order that we should ascend to greater heights than what the soul is, the way it was sent down. That's even though it's a piece of God. Nonetheless, we add beauty to the soul through every good thought, every thought that's connected to a mitzvah, every word that's connected to a mitzvah, Torah mitzvahs. They are then the garments that beautify the soul. This is therefore what Yerichai was the most protected on the land of Israel, because through, right, it was a walled city that was the strongest city. Right, so the metaphor over here, because through going away from evil and doing good in our thought, speech, and action, right, especially to send the spies to make sure what he sends spies to make sure that every thought, speech, and action should be towards Hashem. Then we reach to a refinement And we can even then transform the emotions of the seven nations, right? Until Hashem will then extend the land to include also the three lands, Transjordan, Kini, Kenizi, Kadmoni, which were given a blessing to Abraham, but were not given to Moses and through Moses, Joshua to conquer only the seven Canaanite lands. Because in the time to come, a Mashiach, we will transform through our thought, speech, and action. Then we will come to our emotional makeup. Through that emotional makeup, well, that also comes the intellectual makeup. And then we'll be able to transform that too, the coming of Mashiach. And that is the mimer. All right. Beautiful. We got it all. All right, folks. We'll see you soon.